Hey guys, my name is Nathan, and this is Theology Thursdays. Thanks for joining. And I'm joined by Sophie and Jacob, and my lovely mom, Laura. So hey guys, good to see you again. This is the seventh, or this is going to be the seventh Sunday of Easter, and it's also, as I just realized not too long ago, Ascension Sunday, right? That's actually today. Ascension Thursday is actually today when we're celebrating the Ascension of Jesus. But a lot of churches celebrate on Sunday, so I did a little prep for the seventh Sunday readings. Laura did some prep for the Ascension readings, right? So if it's okay with you, could you give a little bit of like a summary of each of those, and then we can kind of discuss them, and then possibly bring in the readings for the seventh Sunday and see if they can all kind of work together in some way.
Well, okay. On Ascension Thursday, the readings are from the first reading is from Acts, and in Acts, St. Luke describes the 40 days that Jesus spent with the apostles after Easter, coming to them and teaching them more about the kingdom and explaining that they were to stay there and wait for the Spirit to come, and that the Spirit would give them the power that they needed to become witnesses to Him and the gospel, and to spread it to the ends of the earth. And that correlates very. And then He ascended to heaven, and He was taken up in a cloud. And that corresponds with Ephesians. The reading in Ephesians talks about Christ rising up to the right hand of Jesus, staying there and being there on par with God, right? Being God and above all else in creation and every other name. Paul is praying that the Spirit comes to the Ephesians, to all of us, with the gift of wisdom and revelation, so that we can know God better and be enlightened, know the hope that comes with God, which God gives us, and the inheritance, the richness of glory, and our inheritance, and the greatness of His power, which we are to use as witnesses to Jesus throughout the earth.
Sure.
And in the Gospel, Mark is quoting Jesus talking to His disciples and His apostles, specifically telling them to go out into the whole world and proclaim the Gospel. So it's very much, they're all very similar. And that the sign of persons who believe will be their actions, will be the things they do. And that includes things like driving out demons in the name of Jesus and speaking new languages, being able to walk through dangers and be untouched by them, and healing, laying hands on the sick, and they're responding to that. And again, at the end of that gospel, Christ ascends, and the disciples do exactly what they were told to do, and they go out, they preach everywhere, and people are astonished at the signs that Christ is still with them, because they're able to do those things that Christ is
right.
with them.
And that general like maybe astonishment that like, oh, this guy Jesus died, but like we thought that might have gone away, and it didn't go away, and it kept on, things kept on happening. And so it sounds like and I'm just kind of putting, we talked about this briefly before we went on there, but like essentially the readings for the Ascension, for Ascension Sunday are, or for today, well, anyway, the readings for the Ascension are really about Jesus saying, look, I'm gonna go the way you know me, at least, but that's okay, because you're gonna have the Holy Spirit. And not only that, you're gonna do, and He says this even, you're gonna do the things I do and more. All the things I've done, you're gonna do, and more than them. And basically handing down the authority through the disciples, through the apostles, so that we could be Christ on earth, right? Mm-hmm. I remember that I really loved the story, not even as a little kid, because I don't think I thought about it too much as a little kid, but as like a young adult, like in my early 20s, like 22, 23, I was really far away from like my faith, and I remember that Gospel of Mark passage where he's talking about the signs and the things that will follow the disciples, of like you'll be like whatever was stoned, or you'll be stung by or bitten by snakes, by poisonous snakes, and you won't die. You'll get cut by poisonous plants and you won't all this kind of thing. Basically, this like superhuman sounding stuff, and that was the thing that really attracted me as a young adult in my early 20s. Not because I guess because it just seemed like all the movies that I loved watching at the time. Like I loved Superman and I loved the Avengers and the Justice League and anything that had to do with people having this amazing potential that they kind of it's a very like DC comic story line, you know, and yet I was also attracted because this is like our faith, like we actually believe this stuff, like, you know, and I was attracted by what it was saying, and I was also interested and compelled to find out why adults would believe this. You know, why would grown men and women believe that this could happen? And that began like my journey back into the church, and that's not the crux of my faith anymore, but that certainly was like this huge catalyst for me getting back to it. Mm-hmm. You know? Did it ever like strike? I don't know. Have you guys ever thought about that? Like have you guys ever struggled with that? Like what? You know, either like today, seeing that kind of thing, seeing miraculous things or things that we would call miraculous today, or thinking about, you know, how it must have looked back then to see all those things happen. Because I think that's pretty crazy and cool. You know,
my struggle has been wondering really how much faith there is, because I think the masses don't believe that. I think they're shocked when there's a miracle. And if we truly believed, it would be, yes, of course, thank God, you know, without so much amazement. But the fact that people are amazed and questioning and even wondering, still today, like the Pharisees back then, you know, where does this power come from? Always shocks me. And I think more, even recent, knowing more things about like body, mind, spirit, you know, God gives us so much healing within our bodies, within our food, within our whatever, within nature, that we don't know about, that we don't work with. Sure. And I think if we really were faith-filled people, we would be much more aware of and healing ourselves and each other.
Sure.
I agree with you, Laura, but I struggle with that. I struggle with cynicism. To me, I read this and it says, you know, you will drink poison and not die. And I go, yeah, totally. I would drink and not die. Like, no, I would die. And I think that part of that is because of all of the advances that science has made and the technology that is available to us now. And I can look at what we can do secularly, I suppose, if that's even a word. Outside of faith, we have these options to do miracles, things that in the time of Jesus would be impossible, like not even close to believable things. Like even in our lifetime ourselves, how far we have come to where people can now make bionic limbs for amputees that actually work like a real limb. You know, to me that's like amazing, and in a way that makes it even more difficult for me to believe that without the technology it would be possible. So then I end up with this dichotomy. It's actually been only in the last year and a half that I've been a lot less, oh, of course this could happen. Because even up until a year and a half ago, it would be like, yeah, sure, with enough faith, anything can happen. And now I'm like, well, yeah, sure, for like special faithful people, but never for me. like I don't consider one of the saints. You know, I believe Padre Pio, I believe Sister Faustina, I believe all of these people who have done amazing things in faith and with God, and you know, I believe that Padre Pio wrestled with the devil every night and beat him. I believe those things, and I just don't think that could ever happen to me.
And sorry. What I think makes it really hard to believe in these things is that God often leads us into really miraculous places that are much less showy. You know,
Sure.
You're bitten by a snake and you live. You know, if you drink poison and you shall not die. If you survive these things, if you're Lazarus woken from the dead, it's a very, very visible, very showy thing. And the problem is that there is very rarely a call. It seems to me there's very rarely a call in God's plan to reach out to people, to make these showy, visible signs on earth. But at the same time, miraculous things happen that it's just like astounds the mind. We don't even realize them. Like the courses of our life change in miraculous ways far in advance before we begin to grasp the very nature of our lives. Like the steps that led to Sophia and I winding up where we are completely improbable in so many different places. And I dare say miraculous, because it just seems ridiculous, and yet I couldn't imagine being with another person. And it's a perfect example of God working miracles, but there's no showmanship to it, and it's this slow work, this slow, like, infinite work. And I think that God tends to work in these just long, stretched out ways. And the disciples, knowing that, hold on, is you alright?
She wants to say something too.
She wants to eat the whole strawberry. Alright, sorry. I took the strawberry. I took it.
That's alright.
He works in these long ways that we can't grasp. And I think that tends to be his major way of doing it. And I think the disciples tend to communicate the more showy ways, because how else do you write a letter to somebody saying God will move so slowly that you don't perceive it, and then you read later and you realize that these movements were completely shaping the world, your world, and the world of those around you? How do you say that? How do you say that, you know, the life of a Christian ends up pulling at the threads of the people around them and pulling them towards God unintentionally, without any, direct influence, like I'm going to do this.
Sure.
Write that down and inspire people with it, but it's true. God also does miraculous, showy things, and He does them in His time. And it's really difficult, I think, for us to be like, well, it doesn't happen to me. You know, these showy things don't happen to me. So, I mean, it's hard to believe that they're real. I totally see what you guys are saying, and I think it's really a matter of perspective. Like I think showmanship depends on how you see the story and then how you tell the story. Because like I was thinking, especially when you're talking about like times when nothing, like okay, so if you got bit by a poisonous snake and nothing happened, by definition nothing happened. Right? That is a very boring story potentially. Hey, so I was out one day, the snake came close, but nothing happened. That's kind of a bad story, right? It's a way cooler story to say I got bit and I died, but then that's missing something too. And I'm thinking about, I think in my life personally, like I've often had that thought that, well, none of that's ever happened to me, but then kind of has, because if I really think about it, I think about things like, and if I was a good writer, I could probably really write some really great stories. The time that I got a gun pulled on me, right, and nothing happened, right? Nothing, you know, the time when I got in a really bad accident and my car wrapped around a pole and knocked the pole over, right, and my tire got ripped out from my car, and I walked out with one little scratch from the airbag. Like that was pretty miraculous.
and and the time, all these things that I'm like, wait a second, like, the times when I've drank so much, sorry for the students of mine that are probably watching this, but the times that I've drank so much that someone else drank that much and they died, or they got or they got alcohol poisoning, and I was fine. I just woke up with a little headache the next morning. Like, it's by definition the story, and I think especially in today's culture, we're kind of geared, we're so empirically minded, right? We're of the mind to measure things by in an empirical way, by how long it happened and what happened in the dramatic sense of, and so it's hard for us, I think, to think about those things, those times when we had these near misses, this car veered into my lane and I was just driving like a good citizen does, and I barely had the reaction time to miss it. And it literally, the car missed me by like a foot, I think. I thought it was like an inch, but it was probably more like a foot. I mean, those are crazy things, and those things I think happen to people a lot. But our culture is of the mind that just kind of like dismisses those things, and I don't know. So I think it's interesting. I think both things. I think you're right, Jacob. I think God moves definitely in really slow ways, in eons and eons and decades and centuries, to bring about things through generations. And then sometimes I think I must have this like angel on my back saving me from all the stupidity that I go, or just from things that happen. I don't know. I think God works both those ways, but it's only when I focus on, it's only what I focus on that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Thank you. Me that I need to stop Michael Bayifying my faith. I appreciate No, really.
Michael Bay. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, totally.
You're 100% right.
And then there are stories that you read, or if you have the fortune to talk to some of these people who are believers, who go out and have a mission to help those who are so unfortunate as to, for example, live in Juarez, Mexico, through those years of the worst violence in the world, and these staunch Dominican sisters who would go from El Paso to Juarez every week, regardless of the dangers. Women who got hijacked, who lost their cars, but they were not touched. Women who would go and work with the cooperative women groups in Juarez to help them, even though there was so much danger, and they would walk out and they would see someone being murdered one block away, but they were not touched. The whole center was not touched. These women were not, touched. They actually lost their husbands, but the women were not touched. Those babies were not touched. Those are daily miracles among the believers. People that refused, unlike me, a coward that has not returned to Mexico in so many years, unlike me, they have refused to let fear, the devil, stop them from doing their mission, from following their call. Those are the signs of true believers. These are people who walk into the fire and are not burned, even though all around them things were happening. Wow. That is the power of faith that they live and they show. And if anyone listens to those stories, you walk away thinking, oh, me, a little faith. I still do not go to, across the border. I wouldn't dare. They do it on a regular basis, and they have no fear, or rather, I should say, well, they have no fear, and they have told me, if I die, it's my time. But they go about.
And they live it, right?
Live it, and they live it. Amazing.
I think it's for me. I think that I think there's also an element of you'll come across what you're open to. That idea of like when the teacher's ready, the student will appear. When the student's ready, the master will appear. Like if you're ready for that, you're more likely to come across it. I went through this phase in my life, and I say a phase, but that makes it sound that kind of undermines it. I went through this time in my life that lasted maybe like 2 or 3 years when I wasn't seeing anybody. I wasn't like involved in any kind of like strong, serious relationship. I was driving a lot to and from work and school and stuff,
and I was just really open, you know. And I don't remember if I thought about it that way, but I was just, I mean, I had no time constraints. I had a few time commitments that I needed to make every week, but beyond that, I was just free to come and go. And I remember I had a lot of, like, some of the most amazing encounters with people. Nothing necessarily miraculous, right? Nothing necessarily like crazy, but just like not very common encounters. And it was and I really think it's because I was open to them, you know. And it was a lot of times things like there'd be a car stranded on the side of the road, and usually, you know, a lot of people kind of passed it. And now in my life, you know, I often have some place to be, so I'll pass that car by. And then I was open to stopping, and I would stop, and I would help that person out, and then we would have this like great conversation about whatever, right? Or I was walking home from school one time, and often we're driving in cars and we pass homeless people by. We might stop and give them money, but then we end up driving. But I was walking, and there was this homeless guy, and I smoked at the time. I smoked cigarettes at the time, and so he had a few cigarettes, and I stopped and gave him some money, and he gave me a cigarette. He's like, "Hey, do you want to smoke?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And we shared a couple cigarettes, and we had this great conversation. And things that, you know, don't really happen in my life at the moment, and I kind of wish they did. But that also means that if I want them to happen, I need to be open to that again, and open to being free, more free with my time that way. And likewise, I think that's why I love superhero stories so much, and why I personally love reading the Bible so much, because I don't want to get to the point, and I've gotten there before, and I don't again want to get to the point where I'm disillusioned or jaded with the other side of reality. I want to surround myself with stories of crazy things, and I want to surround myself with just enough crazy people and enough spontaneity to where God can work in my life. Because if I control my life too much, then for me that means I'm kind of telling God, you know what, I got it. Don't intervene. I got it. I can do it. But that's for me. That's kind of my take on it.
So we haven't talked about Sunday's readings yet, right?
We haven't, and I don't necessarily think we got to get too far into them. Just to say that the title of this video is "Live in Love to Remain in Love," and that's kind of my understanding of the summary of Sunday's readings, and I think they actually fit in really well with these readings that we've been talking about for Ascension Sunday. Basically, the Sunday's readings, the readings for the 7th Sunday of Easter, which this Sunday is, have to do with replacing Judas. You know, it's in Acts. Judas already betrayed Jesus. Judas killed himself because he did that. So they have to replace Judas so that they have a full number of apostles, I guess. And so they end up picking a guy named Matthias. And then Jesus in the Gospel, John 17, talks about it's the prayer of unity, right? The prayer that help them be one as you and I are one, God. And he's saying, you gave me all these people except for Judas, who was the son of destruction, he calls him. And the second reading is, basically the title of this talk, he who remains in love, who abides in love will remain in me, as I am in the Father. And just this idea, which I think it really ties into this notion that we're talking about, the idea that, for me at least, that being with God isn't easy, isn't like it's not a word thing, it's an action thing. And we have to, kind of like one of the previous weeks reading said, we have to do things. We have to follow God's will, follow God's word. Going that movement from the 600 commandments of the Old Testament to the 10 commandments of the Old Testament to the 2 commandments, love God, love your neighbor, and finally to the 1 commandment that Jesus says, I think in last week's reading or 2 weeks ago, basically just love people the way I love you. And that if you do that, then yeah, you'll be with God because God is love. And the same thing here, Sophie, I like what you were saying. It's crazy to think that I would drink poison or get stung by a snake and not die. However, if it's crazy as a Catholic, almost crazy as a Catholic not to think, or as a Christian not to think, that if I'm doing, and again what the nun said, if I'm doing what God wants me to do and I'm following what I know
God is saying and acting in love, then I might die or I might not, but that's not the point. And so if it comes to that, if I have to drink some poison or if I have to speed down the freeway because something's going to happen 10 miles away, God's going to take care of me. And if that means that he keeps me alive for another day, then that might be a very miraculous thing. And if it means that I end up dying, then that's the way it is, And just kind of being open to that, really. And that's kind of how I see the two sets of readings kind of fitting together, I guess.
I know. The reason why I was asking if we had talked about Sunday's readings is because I thought about something while we were talking right now, and it was really Judas. Like the thing with Judas is very difficult to me because I find it difficult to think how somebody so close to Christ personally would do anything other than what Peter did. I mean, I think at the worst you reject Christ, but then eventually, like, there's part of me that thinks you have to go back to him. Like, how can you spend your whole life rejecting that? And what I was wondering is, with God's ability to do these amazing wonders, and God's abilities to move in such slow ways, and with him knowing the heart of Judas, and what makes him who he is, why is it that there was nothing that God could do to keep Judas? And why is it that there was nothing that God would do to keep Judas? And I guess that's why the Protestants come up with, that the predestination, that idea that Judas, it was just how it's going to end up being, and that fulfilled the prophecy and everything. But at the same time, that betrayal, I mean, there's no way that Jesus in that personal relationship would be okay with there being nothing at all to do. Does it mean like there was like no way, no matter how big the miracle, no matter how small the impact, that it could, be won over? I guess.
I think when Jesus was betrayed in the garden by Judas, in none of the Gospels is there any anger. In none of the Gospels does Jesus condemn him, guilt him, nothing. He says, do what you're going to do, and you do it quickly or whatever, but Jesus...
It's the same thing he does with Peter, right? It's the same thing he does with Peter. Yeah, you're going to deny me. Like, that's what's going to happen.
Right. Each of us has the option of how we're going to react. Each of us has the option of whether to go back and ask for forgiveness after we've done whatever horrible thing we've done. Just like we have the option to believe that our wrong, that our sin was so great that no one can forgive us, even God. I mean, that's our free will. What we do with our sense of guilt is our decision, and God never imposes himself on us to do one or the other. I mean, he's there, he's always giving us love, he's always extending his mercy and his forgiveness, but it's our choice to turn away or not. It's our choice to come back begging for forgiveness or not. And it's our choice, actually, to believe or not that it's possible.
And I guess if I was Judas, like that guilt with betraying the Son of Man, I don't think that I would agree with this.
I don't know what, I mean, of course, like as people, we don't know what happened to Judas after he died. He was doing in the last few minutes of his life, and whether or not he decided to accept God's forgiveness or not. There's no way we can know that.
Yeah.
But sure. I honestly think that if it hadn't been Judas, it would have been someone, because Jesus needed to die in order to rise again and save us from ourselves. And I think that I don't think it was like Judas's mind was made up from the beginning. I think Judas was Jesus's friend. And I think he was tempted by the devil. He fell prey to that temptation, and he did a horrible thing. And I think as people, it's very easy to sin and think, oh, I'm justifying it to myself. Nobody is here watching me. I'm going to go ahead and have that extra piece of cake. And I know that sounds kind of trivial compared to the betrayal of Jesus, but it's not. That's how sin happens.
Right.
Like, that's what sin is. And it's a choice that we rationalize to ourselves. And so I think that Judas wasn't evil. I think he was just human, and he made the wrong choice, and he regretted it immediately. Upon making it, he went and tried to return the silver, you know, and he felt so guilty that he took his own life, because better to be dead than to live with what he has done. And that in itself is also just tragically human, because he wasn't even thinking about like the eternity of his soul, and how, you know, unless you accept the forgiveness of God and of yourself, you have to live with what you've done forever and ever. And so I think that the Protestant idea that he was predestined and, you know, is flawed, because if it hadn't been him, it would have been somebody else.
I tend to think that as well. I tend to think if it was going to be somebody, kind of like Mary too, actually, like, because Mary didn't have to say yes, right?
Yeah.
Someone would have said yes eventually, but Mary did, and it's really easy to think like predestination is the total way to go when you're looking back. You know, obviously it happened that way, and there was no other way that could have happened. You know, but that's not the way that life works, and that's not. And if obviously we don't believe this, but if it was true, what the high priests and the Pharisees were, you know, kind of accusing Jesus of, if he was this like this crazy guy, this rebel, and he was just causing a big ruckus, then Judas was kind of doing a good thing, right? I agree. I don't think Judas was a bad guy. He was a conflicted guy, and he made a decision that happened to have huge ramifications, like huge ramifications that I doubt he could have even fathomed at the time, you know, or anybody could have even fathomed at the time. Especially when you like Jesus dies and all the disciples are like really crushed, right? So it's not like they were all on board with this idea that he was God, right? They couldn't understand that, they couldn't grasp it, and no more could Judas have grasped that. And the question of, and I've wondered this too, definitely, like the question of like, was there nothing God could have done or Jesus could have done to stop it? And I think one answer is like, well, yeah, of course. But that's not, like you're saying, you know, God works sometimes really slow, sometimes God works really fast, and God works the way God works. And God doesn't work by always or often, I think, by obstructing our free will, you know, and we're tempted, and there's always temptation, there's always grace, you know, and we always have the choice. And then when we fall, like we tend to do, there's always, like Mom was saying, there's always, how do we get back up? And Judas happened to not get back up. And what would the story have looked like if he had? It probably would have looked like Peter's story. Probably like he would have gone to Jesus, I'm so sorry. You know, I'm so sorry. I do not know what I did. I'm so sorry. And Jesus would have taken him back and said, look, do you love me? Okay, do this. Do you love me? Do this. And again, that connection between do you love me and what are you going to do about it? Right? Don't just say you love me, do something. Do you love me? Yes, then forgive yourself. Get over it. It's okay. And that's kind of what he did with Peter, and Judas didn't give him that option. So I guess maybe the question is, are we going to give God, are we going to give Christ that option to forgive us? Are we going to give him the option to help us forgive ourselves when we do the inevitable stupid things that we're probably going to do in our lives? Or are we going to allow ourselves to be the Judas in our own story, you know, and when people look back at it? And I think it just speaks to the focusing on what the ascension readings talk about in allowing us to be partakers of the authority of Christ and of the succession of the apostles, and also focusing on what the seventh Sunday readings talk about, and focusing on tying the love that we say we have for God with what are we going to do about it, so that when things get really tough, we can either not fall or get back up.
Sounds good.
All right, maybe that's a good place to stop for this week. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to go ahead and cut this off, but thank you guys so much for joining, and God bless you all. We'll see you next time.